The title of this lecture is Running with the Devil. The Summoner Makes a New Friend in Chaucer's Friar's Tale. In terms of the action that goes down in the tale itself, the Friar's Tale mixes two folk Christian ideas. The first would be the deal with the devil. So if you're familiar with the play Dr. Faustus, that is the main action of that play revolves around a scholar's deal that he makes with Satan for unlimited power for 24 years. And that story gets retold in many, many different forms over the centuries. The Little Mermaid is an example of that deal with the devil trope. The second folk Christian idea is the imagined meetup between a holy person and the devil, wherein the holy person gets tempted in some kind of way, but they wind up putting the devil in his place. Perhaps one of the most famous images showing that idea is this one of Saint Wolfgang and the devil. So he was somebody who was tempted by the devil many times. He ultimately tricks the devil into helping him build a church because he gets wise to the devil's game. So that's usually how it goes down when the devil meets up with somebody holy. The Friar's Tale, too, in its subtext, is also about practicing a certain kind of reading ability known as discernment. And I'm going to explain what that is later on in the lecture. In the Friar's Tale, the anti-clerical motif that runs throughout the Canterbury Tales reaches its pitch when the friar, from the Ellesmere manuscript, there's his portrait, and then the summoner on the bottom, there's his portrait from the Ellesmere manuscript of the Canterbury Tales. They've been at each other's throats the whole trip. If their brief exchanges during the Friar's Tale and after it are any indication, and then they have a few other little eruptions in the entire sequence. So yeah, things are getting interesting when these two tell back-to-back tales. In the Friar's Tale, not surprisingly, he speaks of a wicked summoner who we're about to meet and learn more about. And in the Summoner's Tale, the summoner tells a story about a wicked friar. Here are their two images, as I've said, from the Ellesmere manuscript of the Canterbury Tales. First, let's get our definition straight and consider what a summoner was, as I don't know that this exact job exists anymore. In all the years I've lived on Earth, I have not ever met a summoner that works quite in this way. They would have delivered summons. So you see this summoner extending his hand and holding out a small piece of paper. This meant that the person who received it had to go to ecclesiastical court to answer for certain sins, and these are given in a long list at the beginning of the Friar's Tale. Like the pardoner, whose tale you also read, the summoner was a member of the secular clergy. So he worked for the church, but he hadn't taken any kind of formal vows like a priest, nun, friar, or monk would have, wherein they dedicate their entire lives to this vocation. It's more of a day job, but they did have a good deal of power, as the pardoner also did. So we see them kind of working that little bit of power that they have, stretching it for all it's worth as they exploit lay people on behalf of the church. That's usually how they behave in satirical portraits. So let's get our feet wet with looking at the Friar's Tale to get our characters and the basic setup in place. At the opening of the tale, we are told that there is an archdeacon in power who is, quote unquote, tough on crime, crime being certain kinds of sins for which people can be hauled before the ecclesiastical court and fined. And as I've said, those sins are given there at the opening of the tale. Many of them, as you might notice, pertained to sins involving sexual sins, so like adultery, Uh, and this is where another key player, or in fact, the protagonist of the tale, comes into play. We learn that the archdeacon has in his employ a summoner who knows just where to find this certain kind of sinner. So in the Middle English, we are told that that would be the archdeacon, he had a summoner ready to his hand, a sleer boy nas known in England, for suddenly he had his spell, that taught him well where that him meet avail. He could spare of lectures on or two, to teaching him to 4 and 20 mo. Here the friar is still speaking and is describing briefly the summoner who's in the tale, but of course the summoner pilgrim is there listening, so this is said for his benefit. The friar confides in us, the audience. For though this summoner would were as an ara, to tell his harlotria he will not spare, for we are out of his correction, they han of us no jurisdiction, nay, never a shilling, terma of alla hair leavas. I believe what the friar pilgrim means by that is that the summoner cannot get him into any kind of trouble because he's a member of the clergy, and so thus he's out of the summoner's jurisdiction. Otherwise, it might be because they're on a pilgrimage and they're physically out of the domain that this summoner pilgrim, who's hearing every word of this, they're out of his physical domain over which he has jurisdiction. But either way, he is really jabbing at the summoner pilgrim pretty hard and trying to get him riled up. So in this quick exchange, we have the summoner jumping in to defend himself, and the host, telling him, keep quiet. It's not your turn to tell a tale, so to speak. So let's have a look at this brief passage. The summoner says, Peter, so been women of the Stevas, quoth the summoner, I put out of ura cura. Pace, with mischance and with misadventure. Thus said our host, and let him tell his tale. Nu, tell forth, though that the summoner gala, nay, spareth not, mean ona master dara. So the host defers to the friar, and maybe he's interested in hearing this tale that's going to have the summoner squirming while it's being told. The host is the proprietor of the inn where the pilgrims have originally met each other to go on this pilgrimage. He has tagged along and is now serving as the MC of the tale-telling competition, so he keeps the game running smoothly. So when the tale's action begins, the summoner is headed to swindle an old woman. This is his stated intention, and we meet her later on in the tale. But first, he happens upon a yeoman. So what is a yeoman? A yeoman in this time and place was neither a peasant nor an aristocrat. He was possessed of land and fought on behalf of his lord, and in some cases kept things running smoothly on the lord's property. So his job is described as physically intense and earthy. So hence the outdoor gear that he is shown wearing in the stock pictures, often depicted in a Robin Hood type outfit, which is described in the tale that he's dressed in green and carrying an arrow and a couple of little instruments that you'd associate with this costume. So our friend the summoner asks this guy in green if he is a bailiff, as the new guy has just said he's out collecting rents for his lord, so that particular activity would be something that a yeoman would do, being kind of an in-between person between the aristocracy and the peasantry. The summoner lies and says that he too is a bailiff because he's too ashamed to admit what his real job is. A soundbite that we get there in line 1394. So the new friend says to his summoner friend, I have a gold and silver in me chest. If that they happen to come in Urashira, all shall be thine, read as thou wilt desire. Here's the summoner's response to the new friend's offer. Grant the mercy, quoth the summoner, be me faith, ever each in other's hand his troth layeth, for to be sworn, brethren, till they die. So, fast friends are made just in a single PowerPoint slide. We have the new friend offering his summoner friend the world on a platter, and the summoner eats that right up, and they shake on it. And the idea of blood brothers is a huge motif in medieval literature, so that's what the audience is supposed to think is going on here. It transpired a little bit quickly in this tale for reasons that may become apparent soon. A question that I have for the summoner at this point in the tale is, what is your relative level of nervousness? Point to the image that best captures it. And I'm saying this because I've read enough medieval literature to know that when we meet this new character, there are some warning signs that should make us suspicious of him. Yes, I am going to explain why the summoner should have known that he was talking with the devil. In order to completely understand this, you need to know something about how the devil appears in medieval literature. So by that, I mean more popular literature that's meant to be entertaining as opposed to theological and devotional texts. So here's a little clue about how the devil is often portrayed in medieval literature, with special thanks to South Park's Satan. So that critical bit of information that you'd need to know about the devil is that he's not going to appear like a really scary evil figure. He, in fact, is known to be quite funny. He is, in fact, a comic figure in medieval literature and drama. So, for example, on the medieval stage, the devil and his demons would fart and clown around and sing and be the most obnoxious characters in a drama, let's say about the apocalypse, when they're collecting the souls of sinners to take them into eternal damnation. It's handled with a lot of outrageous antics and silliness, perhaps to lighten the mood a bit. As I suggest here, the live audience might have been too scared of seeing that kind of performance if the devil and his minions were also acting in a really menacing fashion. At the very least, the devil is disarming in medieval literature, so his antagonism becomes evident further down the road, but he's not an imposing and scary figure right off the bat. As I suggest here, like, one reason for that might be to suggest how charming evil can be, and we've seen that already with our friend the summoner, who with the promise of a little bit of gold and silver says, hey, I'll make a new best friend. Here is a major motif in medieval art that suggests how the devil was something of a comic figure, or ridiculous is maybe the better word in this context. Demons often had faces on their butts or groin region. The logic is that humans look upward to God and demons are sinners who have to avert their gaze. So yes, there's like a serious message there, but it also looks funny to have an entity with a face on its butt, as these do. The other reason why the devil is shown with a face on his butt is a caution against vanity, which is linked to pride, which was the original sin. As we see here in this image, if you look up very closely, the woman is preening in the mirror, and behind her, the devil is showing the face that he's got on his butt. And in her mirror, that is all we see. So I think that this image speaks volumes to that connection between the face on the devil's butt and the sin of pride. If we accept the fact that the devil could be funny in medieval literature and get that out of the way, we should then look at 3 clues that the summoner should have picked up on to know that he was meeting up with a literary figure of the devil. First, his quote-unquote new friend is dressed in green. This is a color that in this context would be associated with the natural world, but in terms of the surprises that it could present. So in the medieval poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, by an anonymous author who was working at the same time as Chaucer, the Green Knight is a giant who presents an imposing figure to Arthur and his court, so I won't go into all of that. But yeah, he sure as heck, he's definitely a comedic figure, but he's definitely also not a good guy, as he gives Arthur and the other knights of the Round Table a rough time. And as far as the connection with the natural world, it's more like the deep forest natural world where mysterious things happen. If you imagine that in the Middle Ages, the world is not mapped perfectly and there aren't, road signs, or if you go hiking in the woods, there isn't little rest stations or benches to sit down on or recycling bins. So the natural world really could be kind of eerie and mysterious. The second clue that the devil gives that he is in fact the devil, not just a nice new friend with a lot of gold and silver, is that he is from the North Country. And in this context, this would be some subtextual code for I'm a devil. It was conventional in medieval literature that the devil came from the north, and there are many reasons why that idea might have existed. I'm going to explain it rather than give you 100 examples from medieval literature. I'm going to show you this artifact, which is the Devil's Door. This would have been built onto the north side of medieval churches. Here is what had happened in terms of the culture, and thus to provide context. Heathen worship places had been converted into Christian spaces in early Christianity throughout Western Europe. And the north side of the church had this door put onto it, allegedly to allow these heathen worshipers back into this place that had been taken from them. So why not just take it outright and say, thank you, you can't come back here ever again? Maybe it's the idea of keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. We got to keep an eye on these non-Christian folks who are living in our somewhat immediate environment, and you throw them this little bone to peacify them a bit. The doors, however, are thought just to have a symbolic function and not a practical use, because they were usually too small to function as actual doors. Sometimes they didn't open. I would say from this one, judging from its scale, it's a little bit small to be a door. That is just a brief take on one single example that hammers home that idea, I hope, that the North was associated with the devil's domain. And last but not least, the reason that the summoner should have been a little bit nervous about this friend whom he had made is because the new friend confides in the summoner that his boss is kind of hard on him. "Me lord is hard to me and dangerous." Now, if we interpret that quote from the prior slide, specifically the word Lord as Lord with a capital L, which is exactly the type of clever little pun a devil would make, he's speaking about his relationship with God. And in this time and place, the party line was that the devil was only allowed to do what God permitted. So here we see the Virgin Mary in the upper left-hand side of the screen, brandishing a bat at a devil, and in the lower picture, Christ in his majesty sitting on a rainbow is above the devil and maybe even kind of keeping him there in the bottom part of the page, so to speak. And thus the devil speaks to this idea to his new friend, the summoner, and he says, "For some time we ben God's instruments, and menes to don his commandments, when that him list upon his creatures, in divers art and divers figures. Withouten him we have no meat certain, if that him list to standen there again." I hate to say it, but South Park Satan, once again, very medieval, or to be more specific, in one particular episode, he is made to embody the long-standing idea that Satan, in fact, works for God, even if as a rod of correction, so luring weak people into sin so that sinners can be kind of found out and then punished for having done what they wanted to do. In this episode, I'm referring to Satan pitches in to save South Park, essentially because he's bored for something to do. But nonetheless, it's enough for him when he's killed in action to get transformed into an angel. And so this was a longer part of his storyline in that series, wherein he was definitely a bad guy, definitely an antagonistic figure, but you'd see that there were limits to his power. In the Middle Ages, the devil's role as a divine instrument included his ability to get to mess with holy people, and the devil in the Friar's Tale gives a few examples of this. There's, of course, Job from the Old Testament. The devil tells us, "Witness on Job, whom that we did in woe." So Job has many physical and emotional afflictions placed on him, on his physical body, as well as his family and the things that he owns. Here he's shown suffering from leprosy, and the devil, as he sometimes does, he's farting, and he's serious about it, so he's farting fire in this particular image of him approaching poor Job. Another example is Saint Dunstan, who had many encounters with the devil. This is mentioned in the Friar's Tale. "And some time be we servant unto man, as to the Archbishop Saint Dunstan." Saint Dunstan, in this image here, he's shown grabbing the devil by the nose with blacksmith tongs. The devil had appeared to Dunstan's little hermit hut where he was living at the time to reflect and contemplate the divine and pray. So holy people sometimes do this in medieval literature. He bugs Dunstan, saying that he wants Dunstan, who was a skilled metal worker, to make him a chalice. So that's maybe kind of suspicious. Like, okay, what's this guy going to do with a chalice, especially if the guy is the devil? He pesters Dunstan a few times with this request. The last time he appears in the form of a beautiful woman. So Dunstan goes into his shop and comes back with these tongs and grabs the devil by his nose. Look there in the middle of the devil, kind of not quite in his butt region, but definitely lower than his face. He's got a second face, just to show how ridiculous and devil-like he is. I'd like to speak briefly to the idea of discernment, because this is really what the tale is getting at in the next scenes that we're creeping up on, as well as the devil's discourse about how he goes about doing his business. So in the Middle Ages, it is thought that the devil's key ability is trickery. In the medieval mind, he could work for God by tormenting holy people to get them to show how holy they are. They'd rise to the occasion to vanquish the devil, and he also would tempt sinners into doing what they do. The big scary question was whether the devil could reproduce miracles. For example, at Mass, people might have religious experiences and have a vision of Christ being crucified or something akin to that. Theologians cautioned, don't be naive. The devil knows that this is exactly what you want to see, at Mass. So in fact, something so spiritually edifying as a vision of the crucifixion might in fact just be a trick, catching you unawares, leading you down the primrose path, thinking that you're a holy person, and then boom, he's got some kind of surprise waiting for you. Not a perfect example of this idea, but one that's familiar to you, so I will work with it, or perhaps it is familiar. That is the example of Joan of Arc, who is executed as a heretic because of the dubious source of the voices that she hears. Are they divine or are they demonic? She also is in a pretty frothy political mess when she gets executed, as she has led the French in the Battle of Orleans to victory over the English, turning the tide of the 100 Years' War. It was not looking good for the French. So yeah, when she's turned over to the English, they're probably not going to be too kind to her. And yes, she's executed for heresy, but that's probably some kind of cover up for other political causes. But nonetheless, you'd have to be careful if you do have some kind of religious experience. Is it just the devil tricking you, even if it seems like you are in a holy circumstance? So that idea, what that I've just explained, is known as spiritual discernment. So a specific type of reading ability. Am I dealing with something divine or demonic? The tale puts a twist on this very idea, because it is in fact the devil who is shown practicing discernment when the two friends happen upon a guy who's having a rough day, as we learn from the Middle English. Deep was the why for which the cart stood. So the cart in question has got stuck in some mud. So let's see what happens. The carter smote and cried as he were wode. Hate broke, hate Scott, what spare ye for the stones? The fiend, quod he, you fetcher, body and bonus, as faithforthly as ever were ye followed. So much woe as ye have with you solid. The devil have all, both a horse and cart and a. So let's have a look at how the summoner reacted with a little cartoon clue here on this slide. The summoner says to the devil, "Hearkne, me brother, hearkne, be me faith. Hearest do not who that the carter saith? Hent it anon, for he hath yevit they, both hay and cart, and eke his capless three." The devil responds and shows that he's the voice of reason and measure, saying, "Nay," quoth the devil, "God wot never avail. It is not his intent, trust me well. Ask him thyself if thou not trowest me, or else stint a wheel, and thou shalt say." I'm going to use a fancy term to describe what the devil is getting at. It is the notion of the infelicitous utterance, meaning a spoken performance of some kind that isn't framed in the right way, such that it doesn't mean what the words would literally imply, or what that formula that the speaker is uttering, it does not have its usual meaning. So let me give you some examples. In language study, an infelicitous utterance would be one that lacks context in order to be meaningful. The example that is often used, and here I've added a few specifics for the purposes of this slide. If I were to wave my hands at two people standing next to each other in Walmart and say, "I now pronounce you married," for many reasons, those words, that formula that we associate with that particular type of performance that is joining two people in marriage, they do not have that power to accomplish that action unless other factors are in play. So if the couple has consented to it and I'm authorized to do it, and there are other legal and ornamentative things that are have to be in place for this modest little wedding to be actually valid. So what the devil is pointing out in a slightly different vein than this example is that the meaning was not there to back up the literal words that came out of the carter's mouth. He was just angry. He didn't really mean to actually curse his horses. So it would seem that the devil practices a type of discernment. He behaves like an adult. He doesn't snatch the horses because he realizes the carle spake all thing, but he thought another. The words were not backed by intention. So maybe we think also the devil at this moment, maybe it's because God has him on the leash as well, and he's not allowed to grab people in the act of sinning where it's kind of a dubious case like this Carter. So as you see, the picture of the devil I have here, once again from South Park, he's got his reading glasses on because he's being a discerning adult. So cursing was recognized as a social problem in medieval England, and I'd like to add this to the mix as we consider what's going on with the carter's curse. So whether the carter knows it when he's going off on his horses, like the devil is standing right there overhearing what he says. So hopefully that's not usually the case when people normally sin, that the devil has a front row seat. We know that he doesn't take the carter's horses. He knows that the guy is just angry and mouthing off. But this tale does, in its subtext, offer the reader a bit of caution about watching what you say, because you don't know who might be overhearing you when you, for example, curse at your horses because they have gotten the cart stuck in the mud. So in this time and place, late 14th century England, swearing was recognized as a social problem. So probably not unlike today. One could say, oh, all of the cursing that people do, and it's associated with social media. They're not using the language in the best way possible. Like, that's a rather classic complaint that you find in many cultures that I'm aware of, surely in the English-speaking tradition. In late medieval England, it's thought that swearing, and that entails something like damning your horses, where you're actually literally you're sending them to hell, you're putting a curse on somebody. I'm not talking about the kinds of swears that you might say if you stub your toe, for example, when you're angry. This kind of swearing, if we think about it as oath making, would have been a possible way to appear more aristocratic or fashionable, because those types of elite people would have been involved in higher stakes business dealings, for example, where you have to make oaths. And I don't know if they're swearing on the Bible at this time and place, but picture that kind of level of severity behind the types of contracts that rich and powerful people would have to make. So one theory is that this practice crept down into the general populace. And let me clarify what I mean by swears, and I think that I've made this clear to this point, but I'll hammer home the distinction. I'm talking here about profanities. So swears that were sacrilegious. So the carter sending his team to hell. I have mentioned before the curses on Christ's body that were considered very, very profane and blasphemous. Vulgarities, so the types of swears like the word quote unquote shirt, those are just more like slang terms. They're not the kind of thing you say when you stub your toe in medieval England. Same thing with obscenities. So like the F word and other words associated with sexual activity. Those are more like vulgar words that you wouldn't say to grandma, but they don't have that kind of condemnatory power that swears and oaths and curses do. So we leave the carter, and he hasn't had his team of horses taken away. The devil recognizes he didn't really mean to curse them to hell, but he did overhear him swearing. So we got to keep that in the back of our mind. Like, gee, it sure as heck isn't a good thing that he was swearing and had the devil overhear it. The devil behaved like a good guy in that circumstance. We come to another cursing scene and thus get a basis for comparison. The two friends move to the house of an old woman whom the summoner has said earlier he's going to extort on bogus charges. Specifically, he's going to allege that the old widow had made her husband a cuckold. So a cuckold, meaning that unbeknownst to him, she's had a lover. Here's the old woman's response. I hope it sounds sufficiently angry in Middle English. She says to the summoner, "Thou liegst," quoth she, "be me salvation? Ne was I never e'er knew widow nor wife, summoned unto your court in all me life. Ne, never I nas but of me body true, unto the devil black and rough of hue, yeva I thee body and me pan also." So here we get the devil's reaction. You can compare it with what he says when they discover the Carter cursing. So here he goes. We have the narrator telling us. "And when the devil heard her cursing so upon her knees, he said in this manera, No, mabile." So that's kind of like a stock name for an old woman in medieval England. "Min ona mother dera, is this your will in earnest that ye say?" I'll let the old woman speak for herself. This is how she replies to the devil, who is disguised as a yeoman. So she's not staring right at the devil, but maybe she kind of intuits that she knows who she's talking about, given the specificity of the curse she levies at the summoner. She says, "The devil," quoth she, "so fetch him ere he die, and pan and all, but he will him repenta." So having examined much of the action in the Friar's tale, especially that of the devil figure, are we supposed to think that he really did practice some kind of discernment or reading ability, broadly construed, and thus honor the relationship between words, their meaning, and their context, in saying, yeah, the Carter was just kind of flapping his gums. He didn't really mean to send his horses to hell, as much as I might like to take them there. Or in his refusal to act on the Carter's curse, is it something less noble, as I've suggested? Is it because God has him on that kind of leash and he works as one of God's instruments, but God's saying, like, I'm not going to use you here and now. Another option that's present in the text, but not super close to the surface, is that perhaps the friar pilgrim who's telling the tale devised this particular scenario so that the summoner character would look even worse than the devil he befriends on a little walking trip, from an ethical standpoint, that is, because he was going to dive right in and take the Carter's cart and said, "Oh, the devil, he's giving this to you." So making him look like the less good person in that exchange, like, certainly makes a larger comment about summoners. And he gets an immediate one-way trip to hell at the end of the story. So maybe it's less about this type of discernment and reading ability than it is the friar wanting to get in a cheap shot and using this ethical question as an alibi for doing so. In case you're feeling sorry for the fictional summoner in the Friar's tale, we should remember that the summoner gets in a response to his friend who's there on the pilgrimage. He's going to tell a story about a corrupt friar. If this is any indication of what the tale is about and how nasty it is toward friars, it opens with an image of hell, where the fictional summoner has now gone. And what does this summoner see there? From underneath Satan's uplifted tail, friars swarm out of his butt. So yes, a very, very unique and interesting and unforgettable image. But where does the summoner get that from? Why does he use that particular image? Medieval hell was commonly portrayed as a mouth. So the hell mouth is commonly depicted in medieval iconography. I could have shown you any number of hundreds of images of the Hellmouth. So here's just a couple of really gnarly looking ones. We know that in images of the demonic, the face was often relocated to like the butt or groin region. So the summoner is working with that kind of reversal in saying that, okay, I'm not going to use the traditional Hellmouth image. I'm going to use something like a hell butt image, so to speak. It was, not that extraordinary because devils were often associated with that kind of comic inversion between the face and the butt. But it does suggest, starting his tale, that I'm not messing around. I'm not going to work with this image of the Hellmouth. I'm going to start with this quote unquote hell butt that the friars live in for all of eternity and proceed from there.